Hey, my friend, welcome back to another show. So you probably heard the news, and this was a trending story in science, and it's going to be the topic of today's podcast, that there is lasting immunity in people who have had even just a mild infection with SARS-CoV-2. Now, because the title of the paper is SARS-CoV-2 infection induces long-lived bone marrow plasma cells in humans, I would like to unpack some of the details and the nuances here because immunology can get complex very quickly. And when people hear plasma cells, I think they're associating that with plasma that people donate, like at blood banks and things like that. These are different. These cells are related to the B cells that make a bunch of antibodies. They're inducible. And it seems that after various different infectious insults or inflammatory insults, these cells will go and hang out in your bone marrow for years or even a lifetime. And so this might sort of help us better understand the adaptive immune response when it comes to SARS-CoV-2 and sort of the dearth or the lack of long-lasting antibodies, and the fact that maybe if you get reinfected or re-exposed, that these plasma cells come out of their sort of hiding place in your bones and start making a lot of antibodies. So we're going to talk about the physiology here, specifically as it relates to metabolic health, because there's this phenomenon known as osteosarcopenic obesity. And I think this is important because some individuals may not sort of cache this immunologic memory the same way, dependent upon their health. And that's the whole point of using these sort of timely topics to reinforce diet and lifestyle related improvements so that we can make better health choices. Whether you're a pro-V or anti-V, or you're on the fence, or you're unsure, should I be giving this to my kid? Do I need it? Whatever. This conversation is going to focus on immune health. So we're not going to talk about immunizations or things along those lines, but whatever camp you're in, you should welcome this new information because it hopefully will be relatable to both people that have had natural immunity or people who have had immune support by way of pharmaceuticals and things like that. I'm open-minded to whatever philosophical sort of personal choice you decide to make on this matter. But today we're going to focus more specifically on just the immune system physiology as it relates to diet and lifestyle related conditions. So I just want to welcome our new listeners. It's Mike Mutzel. As always, I'm grateful that you're here, whether you're listening on iTunes, Spotify, or on YouTube. If you're enjoying the content, you can take a screenshot, share this over on Instagram, or share this with a friend if you think this information would resonate. And I will put some of the links that we talk about to, I think we're going to unpack about 6 or 7 different studies here in the show notes that will be available on our website, highintensityhealth.com. So let's get right into it. So the title of the study again is SARS-CoV-2 infection induces long-lived bone marrow plasma cells in humans. Okay, so let's just talk about what these plasma cells are and build upon some of the concepts that we've been talking about over the past 15 months. So you might think plasma cells, isn't that the stuff that you donate? You donate plasma at the blood bank. These are different, okay? These are induced by B cells. Now let's just talk about your immunity, okay, for a second. You've heard about your innate versus adaptive immune system. Okay, so you kind of have 2 branches of your immune system. The innate immune system doesn't have memory, okay? So these are like natural killer cells. It doesn't remember, it's on or off. And this is why individuals do have a lot of challenges with this particular pathogen because, once the viral load gets to a certain level, the innate immune system becomes over exuberant and over activated and causes collateral damage that can then ultimately kill people. And so having this balance, this immune tolerance is really important. And how can we improve that? We're going to talk about that throughout this conversation, but this is where real food nutrition, exercise, sleep, vitamin A, vitamin D, gut health, eating real food, all of that, you create this immune tolerance. And so immune tolerance is key when it comes to allergies, when it comes to autoimmunity, and even, as it turns out, especially with this particular pathogen, infectious disease. So you have your innate immune system, then you have your adaptive immune system. And the main characteristics that are different between these 2 sort of bifurcated immune systems is one has memory, one doesn't. The innate immune system doesn't, the adaptive immune system does. And the adaptive immune system can be further divided into the humoral immunity and then cellular immunity, which we've talked about on other podcasts. And that's as far deep as we're going to go. Okay. So just hold that. If that's too confusing, you're like, oh my gosh, I need notes for just take a breath. Okay. So humoral immunity has to do with antibodies. And again, this is what's cool about the adaptive part of your immune system is there's built-in redundancy. So you have cellular mediated immunity, which are your T cells. We talked about that 2 or 3 episodes ago. And we took a deep dive into that. The T cells, again, you have antibodies and T cells, so you have redundancy. This is what is so cool about your immune system is if there's insufficient antibodies, well, then guess what? At least you have the fallback. And I'm not sort of relegating T cell immunity that it's somehow inferior to antibodies. It's just there is redundancy. And in fact, I would argue that I would rather have T cells and antibodies because, in fact, T cells help to induce and mature the B cells and the antibody that ultimately lead to antibody production, okay? So that's the sort of adaptive phase of your immune system. So if you want to learn more about T cells, T cell testing, how you can do all that, go back a few episodes ago. We took a deep dive into that, and that's really important. And let me just hit the pause button. Both the B cells, the plasma cells that we're going to get into that are found in your bone marrow, and the study actually biopsied bone marrow in individuals who had a previous but mild SARS-CoV-2 infection, and they're still hanging out there, these plasma cells. These plasma cells generate a bunch of antibodies. So they're really important for, again, antibody-mediated immunity. And so it might explain the presence of these plasma cells deep in the bone marrow and different lymphatic regions in the body. They're also in and around the gut, by the way, so gut health matters. But it turns out that maybe once you're re-exposed, that you might have super physiologic levels of antibodies circulating. But when the messages are sent that you're re-exposed, that the plasma cells will sort of come out of their hiding and they have that cached memory of being previously exposed. So then they start generating a bunch of antibodies, and we'll quantify how much antibodies these plasma cells actually make. It's actually really, really exciting and really important. So that's sort of the background on some of the high level overview of the innate versus the adaptive immune system and the cellular mediated immunity versus humoral immunity. So again, these are just ways of characterizing what the immune system is doing. But we need to understand that ultimately these plasma cells are made by B cells that are, you've heard a lot about. So B cells will start to, these effector B cells will get the messages, hey, there's a pathogen, there's an infectious something, there is a gluten, maybe dairy, casein, whatever on board, and we don't like that. The innate immune system will tell that to the B cells and the T cells. The T cells will start to make memory T cells and effector T cells and CD4 T cells, and your B cells will start to make their own antibodies. Then they differentiate into plasma cells, which go on and they're like the antibody factories. Okay, so that's the physiology of it. And these plasma cells go deep in hiding. They sort of hang out in your bone marrow and the lymphoid tissue like we talked about. So I think this news is really good because the media and the experts up to now have been focused on, well, antibody levels vary person to person. Some people have them, some people don't. So we're really kind of worried about natural immunity. Maybe it's not that effective and all of this sort of thing. But if now we have this data, these bone biopsies, it wasn't in thousands of people. I think it was 17 people in a control group, but they biopsied the bone and found that there are kind of these plasma cells hanging out there, and they are very specific. They specifically respond to SARS-CoV-2, especially compared to the control group that was not exposed. So I think that's important. So just a few notes here that we're going to dive into. Effector B cells response can undergo affinity maturation and generate both memory and long-lived plasma cells, even under T cell independent conditions. So as we talked about on the T cell immunity podcast 2 episodes ago, these T cells are super important in terms of their built-in immunologic redundancy, because not only are they going after infected viral, they go affect the infected cells. They're going and destroying those cells so that they don't start replicating and so forth, because the viruses hijack cellular machinery. But they also are involved in B cell synthesis generation that make the antibodies. So they're doing a lot. They're wearing more hats. So let's sort of get into some of this. This was a really cool paper, just more backstory and perspective. And let me pause here, because some of you are probably like, okay, so why do I even care about this stuff? Well, this is where lifestyle and nutrition and exercise really matters. And this is why it probably makes sense that people who are metabolically healthy, people who exercise, people that are intentional about their health, probably have quantitatively higher levels of antibodies and more lasting antibodies over their lifetime in the post-infectious window, because of the critical crosstalk and communication between bone and the immune system. So there is a term called osteosarcopenic obesity that we talked about we've discussed this on this podcast before. And one of the papers that I would like to, share with you is the title of this is Aging Human Body, Changes in Bone, Muscle, Body Fat with Consequent Changes in Nutrient Uptake. And so there is a sort of this idea of osteopenia and sarcopenia being the same sort of condition that are driven by a hypercatabolic state and an inflammatory state, and with changes in nutrition, changes in demand, changes in exercise, and all of that. And so it turns out that loss of bone and muscle and increase in fat all happens at the same time. So, we do see this with people that gain weight. They start to lose muscle. And the muscle, because what happens is you get intracellular lipid formation in the muscle. It causes the muscle to become more inflamed and catabolic and all of this. So there's this crosstalk, and there's a few different papers. One of them, if you want to even dive further into this, is titled Osteoporosis and Sarcopenia, Two Diseases or One. And this was published in 2016 in the journal Current Opinion in Clinical Care and Metabolic Care. And one of the summary, this is just an opinion paper, not an opinion paper, it's just a review paper. New chemical entities, they go on with the summary. New chemical entities aiming all concomitantly treating osteoporosis and sarcopenia could be developed by targeting pathways that control and regulate bone and muscle and emerging pathways that facilitate the communication between these two tissues. So there are some great images here that talk about how essentially these two conditions, osteopenia and sarcopenia. Again, sarcopenia, if you're new to that, is loss of muscle. So loss of bone, loss of muscle, gain in fat, this triad, this vicious circle that's occurring at the same time. Okay, so Mike, why are you talking about bone and muscle? We want to talk about antibodies. Well, this is where it comes back to what's going on right now. These plasma cells, these long-lived bone marrow plasma cells, if you have fatty bone, if you have osteoporosis, your bone is sick because you don't exercise, because you eat like crap, and are stressed out and don't sleep and have sleep apnea and all of these things. Well, guess what? How can we be so confident that these plasma cells are going to be hanging out there, caching this immunologic memory to SARS-CoV-2? We can't. And in fact, this study actually, the study that was newsworthy in Nature this week found that there was a small percentage, I think it was like 12% or 15% of the people that had their bone marrow biopsied, they didn't have any plasma cells there that were reactive to SARS-CoV-2, even though they had previous exposure. So what would be interesting to me as a follow-up curiosity question is, what are the clinical features or immunopathologic changes in those individuals that would sort of hint at why they may not have had these plasma cells in their bone marrow? Do they have osteoporosis, osteopenia, or this new triad of osteosarcopenic obesity going on? I don't really know. Interesting stuff. So let's sort of get a little bit more into this. But first, I do want to just pause and let you all know that this show is brought to you by our sister company, Myoscience Nutrition. We are offering a new N-acetylcysteine with glycine formula. There's been a huge interest in N-acetylcysteine because of how the FDA initially classified it. Companies like Amazon and Whole Foods are being extra cautious in pulling N-acetylcysteine. So while it's still available, I did want to let you guys and gals know we do have a really cool formulation. It's not under our own brand, but we're bringing it in from a reputable raw material supplier where we do order some of our formulations from Pure Encapsulation. So this is a powder. What's cool about this is the N-acetylcysteine and glycine combination are unique because cysteine and glycine are one of the 3 amino acids that synthesize and go into the creation of the glutathione tripeptide. The other amino acid, of course, is glutamine that you know. So this is, and independent of that, N-acetylcysteine and glycine, independent of glutathione, have their own health enhancing effects. They're involved in phase 2 detoxification. They're involved in many different aspects of neurotransmitter biosynthesis. For example, glycine participates in GABA synthesis. Glycine is really, really cool. We're adding glycine to a few of our different formulations as we speak because it is a really neat raw material. So this powder on a gram per gram basis is, first of all, it tastes great. It mixes well. And it's 1.8 grams of N-acetylcysteine and glycine together. So you're getting 3.6 grams of amino acids, and it's for only $29. So you can hop on over to myoscience with an X.com. That's MYOXE myoscience.com, myoscience.com, and you can search for NAC and check that out. So while supplies last, because unfortunately, N-acetylcysteine is turning into like the toilet paper of 2021. People are in the supplement space are just globbering all over it, but I don't suggest hoarding this. Maybe have a bottle or two, just in case you go out and drink some alcohol, you have a little bit too much whiskey or wine, or your occupation is such where you're exposed to chemicals that you would like to enhance the elimination of. This is where this combination can be helpful. You want to dose it at night. 1 scoop is totally fine. So check that out. Okay, so back to the bone marrow plasma cells. So these are specialized to secrete really high and large amounts of antibodies. Around 10,000 per second neutralizing antibodies. And so they can be divided into different distinct categories based upon how long they live. So, and this is important. This is a kind of a thing that you want to maybe mentally cache in your own brain. Short-lived plasma cells have a lifespan of like 3 to 5 days. And then these long-lived plasma cells, and these are what were found in this recent study in Nature, they're around for up to a lifetime. So these can be around for a very, very long time, but who knows if you have this osteosarcopenic obesity going on or other metabolic diseases or your bone marrow is messed up. Are you going to be caching these cells in there for a long time? I'm not really sure. So there's 2 different subtypes, and we're going to go on in this article. The lifestyle of memory, I'll back up. The lifestyle of memory plasma cells is complex. It involves many intracellular factors and mechanisms, all of which influence the maintenance of memory of plasma cells more or less. Apparently, communication between the different factors and mechanisms is essential for establishing a survival network for memory plasma cells. Okay, so essentially there's like 648 genes that are upregulated, other genes are downregulated. There's all this crosstalk between various aspects of the immune system. That's the message, the take-home message from what I would like to share with you, because this is the important point. We know that there is dysfunctional crosstalk in the immune system in people who are obese, overweight, who have asthma, allergies, autoimmunity, intestinal permeability, and chronic inflammation. There's aberrant immune system changes. There's dysfunctional communication. And this is even in immunization responses. So this is the other thing that's really important for society that's banking on a successful immunization. You have a lot of people who have a dysfunctional immune system. So what is the efficacy long-term going to be of that immunization? So it's important that, again, it's not an anti-immunization message. It's that, hey, we also need to promote nutrition, diet, and lifestyle. So the bone marrow is primarily a survival niche for these memory plasma cells. In addition, secondary lymphoid tissues like the spleen provide a limited number of plasma cells for survival niches. However, in the presence of chronic inflammation, memory plasma cells can also be detected in inflamed tissues. So check this out. There's probably just a finite amount of these plasma memory cells. I mean, it's feasible to think that they're not just unlimited amounts. So if you're chronically inflamed, if you have obesity, if you have excessive belly fat, and we know that these cells can be found around the gastrointestinal lymphoid tissue and the visceral adipose tissue, the omental fat, where there's all these immunologic, lymphoid nodules and things like that around the abdomen. Well, if your immune system's being constantly pulled, then how much bandwidth does it also have to then, make these plasma cells and have them just sort of hang out and cache the immune memory in the bone marrow? I mean, we don't have this data yet, but it's interesting to sort of understand that. So this was another paper that I wanted to bring to your attention, titled "Plasma Cells: The Next Generation Beyond Antibody Secretion." So, and this involves the gut. Gut homeostasis in plasma cells is the subtitle of this particular paragraph in the paper. A majority of plasma cells reside in the gut, as this tissue provides a direct interface between host cells and microbes. These cells play critical roles in gut homeostasis through the production of secretory IgA. Let's talk about that in a moment, which regulates not only the exclusion of IgA cross-reactive bacteria, but also the propagation of the immune response. However, a recent study in mice has shown that plasma cells promote the generation of regulatory T cells in the gut through the production of TGF-beta and retinoic acid. We're going to talk about IgA here in a moment and retinoic acid, which is vitamin A. Suggesting that plasma cells are important in maintaining immune tolerance, intestinal immune tolerance, which is how we started this conversation off, the importance of immune tolerance. So you want an adaptive and innate immune system that are not constantly being triggered and releasing antibodies and cytokines and creating autoimmunity and inflammation. So gut health matters. So it's not just that these long-lived plasma cells hang out in the bone marrow. They do, as the studies have shown, but they're also present in the gastrointestinal lymphoid tissue, the immune tissue in the gut. So really important stuff there. Now, I told you I wanted to unpack a little bit more about secretory IgA. So there's some data that showing that IgA can be reduced. So this is like it's almost like an innate immunoglobulin in the sense that it's sort of non-specific. Secretory IgA is sort of non-specific. So it's kind of like your innate immune cells, like your natural killer cells, in that sense that it should be there. It's non-specific. It can neutralize bacteria and viruses and things like that. But it is technically an immunoglobulin, so therefore it's sort of characterized as an adaptive part of your immune system. But this is really important for individuals who are, maybe you're eating out, maybe you're going out in public, you're a frontline worker, you're exposed to a lot of people. You want secretory IgA levels to be high. Because this can neutralize all sorts of pathogens in the environment. And so psychological stress, physical stress, overtraining, lack of sleep, all of these things actually tank secretory IgA. So this is partly why some people, remember in college, or if you're in college or have a kid that's in school where they're super stressed out, they're burning the needle, candle at both ends, staying out late and drinking, or studying for finals, cramming and all of that, and you get sick. Well, part of that is mediated through a reduction in secretory IgA. In fact, several studies that have been really interesting, I've shared this with you before with regards to L-theanine supplements, where there was a clinical study that had individuals walk across a precarious bridge, kind of envision like an Indiana Jones type bridge, right, where Harrison Ford is crossing and it's kind of sketchy. And they tested secretory IgA levels in individuals. Then they had them a different group, that was a control group, and then they had a different group take L-theanine 30 minutes before, and they also walked across a precarious bridge. Well, it turned out that being in the calm, the alpha wave induced by L-theanine changed kind of the brain physiology and the stress response, so that there wasn't a stress-induced reduction in IgA when they crossed the bridge, compared to the control group that had a greater psychological stress-induced reduction in IgA. So secretory IgA is really important for gut health, but also it's important for just, and it's inducible in the sense that if we don't manage our stress, then we can have a reduction in secretory IgA. Now, I also told you I wanted to further, kind of circle back and talk about retinoic acid or vitamin A, because this is really important for these plasma cells, these long-lived bone marrow-derived plasma cells, that release a lot of antibodies. But it turns out that retinoic acid or vitamin A is intimately involved in the differentiation of these cells and their production of antibodies. So if you're a vegan or vegetarian, if you're not getting liver, if you're not getting vitamin A from your diet, well, that could be a problem. And so we know people that are eating processed food, junk food, they live off McDonald's and stuff from convenience stores, they might not be probably are not getting enough vitamin A. So that could be another factor with regards to long-lasting immunity. Let's finish off with a few quotes from this article that was also published in Nature, titled, "Had COVID, You'll Probably Make Antibodies for a Lifetime." So this was a pretty cool image here about this plasma cell, this bone marrow-derived plasma cell that I can show up here. So it's interesting. And the title, the subtitle under the image is "A Bone Marrow Plasma Cell Artificially Covered." Such cells, which produce antibodies, linger for months in the bodies of people who have recovered from COVID-19. So the article goes on to say, many people who have been infected with SARS-CoV-2 will probably make antibodies against the virus for most of their lives. So researchers suggest who have identified long-lived antibody-producing cells in the bone marrow of people who have recovered from COVID-19. The study provides evidence that immunity triggered by SARS-CoV-2 infection will be extraordinarily long-lasting. Added to the good news, the implications are that vaccines will have the same durable effect, says Mino van Zelm, an immunologist at University of Melbourne, Australia. Antibodies, proteins that can recognize and help to inactivate viral particles, are a key immune defense. After a new infection, short-lived cells called plasmablasts are an early source of antibodies, but these cells recede after a virus is cleared from the body, and other longer-lasting cells make antibodies. Memory B cells patrol the blood for reinfection, while bone marrow plasma cells hide away within the bones, trickling out antibodies for decades. So, friends, this is really important stuff. Now, remember, Individuals who are chronically inflamed, individuals who are eating processed food, not exercising, might have plasma cells that are the bandwidth of the plasma cells might be more allocated to this chronic inflammation. And so therefore, they might not get sufficient and lasting immunologic memory in the post-infectious window when it comes to SARS-CoV-2. Interesting stuff. A plasma cell is also our life history in terms of the pathogen we've been exposed to, says Ali Elleberry, a B-cell immunologist at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, who led the study published on May 24th in Nature. Researchers presumed that SARS-CoV-2 infection would trigger the development of bone marrow plasma cells. Nearly all viral infections do, but there have been some signs that severe COVID-19 might disrupt these cells' formation. Some early COVID-19 community studies also stoked worries when they found antibody levels plunged not long after recovery from infection. So the team tracked antibody production in 77 people who recovered from mostly mild cases of COVID-19. As expected, SARS-CoV-2 antibodies plummeted in the 4th month after infection, but this decline slowed. And up to 11 months after infection, the researchers could still detect antibodies that recognize the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein. To identify the sources of the antibodies, Elleberry's team collected memory B cells and bone marrow from a subset of participants. 7 months after developing symptoms, most of these participants still had memory B cells that recognized SARS-CoV-2. In 15 of the 18 bone marrow biopsies, the scientists found ultra-low but detectable populations of bone marrow plasma cells whose formation had been triggered by the individual's coronavirus infection 7 to 8 months before. Levels of these cells were stable in all 5 people who gave another bone marrow sample several months later. So that's what's really important. This is very important observation, given claims of dwindling SARS-CoV-2 antibodies, says Rafi Ahmed, an immunologist at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, whose team co-discovered the cells in the late 1990s. So he was the co-discoverer of this, which I did on a YouTube video, shared one of his papers actually yesterday. What's not clear is that the antibody levels what they will look like and whether they will offer protection, Ahmed says. We're in the early stages of the game. We're not looking at 5 years or 10 years after infection. So interesting stuff. Now, I just wanted to share that with you as we finish off because, as we talked about, there's like 468 some odd genes that are upregulated. There's all this communication necessary to induce these cells, which will make hopefully lasting immunologic memory. So we need to focus on health, friends. We, whether you're in the pro V or you're on the fence or you're unsure, health is really important, right? So eating real food, exercising every day, walking, going to bed and minding your body's circadian clock system, improving gut health, eating fermented foods. I'm a huge fan of fermented foods periodically. I think you should be as well. If you go to different cultures throughout the world, people do this, and we just don't do this in westernized countries, and we probably should. But there's many different aspects to this micronutrient balance. Remember, vitamin A and vitamin D share receptors and crosstalk, so make sure to get your sunshine. If not, you can get vitamin D. Check out the show notes for more references on that. But important stuff, friends. So I think we're one step closer to, and I think as a society, we should be recognizing natural immunity more. I mean, I know there's this big push for immunizations, but why aren't we also, why are we relegating natural immunity to that's just crap, it doesn't matter? When reinfection rates, there was one study that showed they're less than 1%. So we're sitting here sort of relegating this to the who gives a crap box when we should be acknowledging this and studying this and talking about this, because with natural immunity, there's redundancy. You make immunologic memory to the nucleocapsid, to the non-structural proteins, to other elements, not just the spike protein. So friends, that's it for today. Hopefully you enjoyed this short, 20 minutes or so video. If you did, you can hit that like button. If you're over in Spotify or iTunes, it would be awesome if you could leave us a little bit of feedback. That goes a long way in our production of these episodes and letting me and our team know what you find helpful and useful in your life. So have an awesome Memorial Day weekend. I'm grateful that you're still here, still watching, still listening. That really means a lot to me. Definitely check out the show notes and spread the word that we need to make healthy living great again. Have a good one. We'll catch you all soon. Bye now. you.